The fact that a thought appeared in your mind does not mean it came from your heart, and it does not mean you have to sign your name beneath it. Now hold fast to that distinction, because it will govern everything that follows. The presence of a thought is not agreement with that thought. Agreement is not the same as action, and your identity must not be determined by every sound, image, question, or fearful suggestion that passes through your mind. Some people have been troubled by repetitive fears. Others have seen a disturbing image in the imagination, felt an unwanted impulse, or heard a condemning question rise within. What if this happens? What if that thought reveals who I really am? What if I have already failed because it came into my mind? Because the thought is vivid, it feels important. Because it is frightening, it feels authoritative. But vividness is not truth, and emotional force is not rightful authority. You see, if the appearance of a thought proved that you desired it, then being grieved by it would make no sense. The very fact that it startled you may show that it conflicts with what you value. Yet fear turns that reaction around and says, if this thought troubles you so much, it must mean something terrible. No, it means you were troubled by a thought. Do not add a verdict that the thought itself has not proved. There are two extremes to avoid. One is to panic over every unwanted thought, examine it endlessly, and treat it as a spiritual emergency. The other is to accept every thought passively, as though whatever enters the mind deserves a seat of authority. Neither response is wise. We are going to take a balanced course. Notice the thought calmly, test its claim, separate it from your identity, answer it with relevant truth, redirect your attention, and seek appropriate support when distress persists. That is not denial. It is deliberate government of your response. You are not pretending the thought did not appear. You are refusing to grant it ownership merely because it appeared. So when an intrusive fear comes, begin here. Say plainly, I noticed that thought, but I have not agreed with it. Do not rush beyond that sentence. Let it straighten out the first confusion. Mental appearance is not moral ownership. Now we must go one step further, because people often use three different things as though they were one and the same. Experiencing a thought, believing a thought, and acting on a thought are separate events. Until we understand that distinction clearly, fear will keep trying to join together what should remain separate. First, there is the experience of a thought. That simply means you became aware of something in the mind. It may have come as words, an image, an impulse, a memory, or a prediction about what might happen. You noticed it. That is the first event. Second, there is believing the thought. Believing means that you grant credibility to its claim. You begin to say, perhaps only inwardly, this must be true, or this probably means something. The agreement may be confident, or it may be hesitant and driven by emotion, but it is still different from merely noticing what appeared. Third, there is acting on the thought. Acting means that you choose some behavior in response. You withdraw, you check, you confess repeatedly, you seek reassurance, you avoid a place, or you carry out some other action. Now notice, awareness, belief, and action are connected only when you connect them. They are not one automatic event. For instance, suppose a frightening prediction flashes through your mind. Something terrible may happen today. Your body reacts. Your heart beats faster, your muscles tighten, and you feel alarmed. Then you make an additional judgment. Because I thought it and felt afraid, this must be a warning. But that second sentence was not contained in the first thought. Something terrible may happen was the thought. Therefore it must be a warning was your interpretation of the thought. Fear joined those two statements together and tried to make them look like one message. You may say, but this thought has returned many times. Surely its repetition means it is important. Not necessarily. A repeated thought may become familiar. Familiarity can make it easier to notice, and repeated attention can make it feel louder. But repetition does not turn a possibility into a certainty, and it does not give a thought rightful authority. A doorbell may ring more than once, but the ringing does not decide who owns the house. Temptation may be experienced without being embraced. Fear may be felt without being obeyed. A memory may return without defining the present. Imagination may produce a picture without predicting the future. These things can occur within awareness, but they do not become identity merely because they cross the mind. So when distress rises, slow the process down and ask 3 questions. First, what appeared? Name the thought without decorating it. Second, what did I conclude about it? Separate the thought from the meaning you added. Third, what am I now choosing to do? Bring the matter back into the realm of deliberate response. That little examination will help you stop treating involuntary awareness as voluntary consent. A thought may knock at the door of attention, but attention alone does not grant it residence. It does not grant it authority. It does not promise it obedience. Now that we have separated experiencing, believing, and acting, we can see the next problem clearly. Fear is always trying to collapse those 3 stages again. It takes a passing thought and calls it prophecy. It takes an unwanted image and calls it identity. It takes distress and calls it proof of spiritual failure. That is the mechanism we must examine next. Fear does not merely place a possibility before you. Fear demands that you treat that possibility as a verdict. It says this may happen, and then before you have examined the claim, it adds, therefore it will happen. It says this thought appeared, and then adds, therefore this is who you are. It says you feel distressed, and then concludes, therefore you have failed spiritually. Now those are 3 false labels, and we must recognize them. The first label is prophecy. This thought predicts what will happen. The second label is identity. This thought reveals who I really am. The third label is condemnation. This thought proves that I have abandoned my faith. Fear takes a mental event and gives it a title it has not earned. Then a cycle begins. The thought appears, and the person panics over what it might mean. Because the person is alarmed, they begin watching the mind to see whether the thought will return. Because they are watching for it, they notice it more quickly. And because they notice it more quickly, they say, there it is again. This must be serious. But notice what happened. The increased awareness was treated as confirmation. The person found what they had been anxiously monitoring, and fear called that discovery evidence. Yet repetition did not prove the thought true. Attention merely made the thought easier to detect. Emotional intensity can mislead us in the same way. A thought feels powerful, so we assume it possesses authority. But a strong feeling measures how distressed you are at that moment. It does not measure truth, predict destiny, or define moral character. An alarm may be loud while still requiring examination. Suppose a believer is troubled by an unwanted thought and begins checking the heart. Do I truly reject this? Am I completely certain? What if part of me agrees? Let me examine myself once more. The person finds a moment of relief, but soon the doubt returns, so the examination begins again. Before long, nearly all their attention is fixed upon the thought they are trying to escape. You see, the demand for perfect certainty has become part of the trap. The person is no longer simply rejecting the thought. They are trying to produce a feeling of absolute assurance before they permit themselves to continue living. Some have assumed that a faithful person should never experience anything disturbing in the mind. But maturity is not proved by the complete absence of unwanted thoughts. Maturity is shown in learning how to respond to them with truth, wisdom, and responsible action. A thought's arrival is not the final measure. Your response matters. We must avoid 2 errors here. One error assigns spiritual meaning to every mental movement. The other error dismisses responsibility and says thoughts never matter. Both are unbalanced. Thoughts should be examined, but they should not be worshiped. They may influence us, but they do not automatically rule us. Authority begins by refusing false jurisdiction. A thought does not receive the right to define you merely because it speaks in the first person. It does not become urgent truth merely because it shouts. And it does not become a divine message merely because it arrived unexpectedly. So practice these short refusals. That is a fear, not a prophecy. That is an unwanted thought, not my identity. Distress is not proof that I have abandoned my faith. Say what is necessary, and then stop trying to solve the thought as though your life must remain suspended until it disappears. Fear loses leverage when you stop interpreting appearance as agreement. Now we can turn from diagnosis to practice. The first response is not to embrace the thought, and it is not to panic over it. The first response is to notice it calmly, name what is happening, and create enough room to answer deliberately. To notice a thought means that you pause long enough to identify what is happening, but not long enough to begin an internal trial. You are not placing your whole character on the witness stand. You are simply recognizing a thought has appeared and fear is reacting to it. Use plain language. You might say a frightening thought is present, or my mind is offering a worst-case prediction, or perhaps an old mental pattern has been activated. That kind of language describes the experience without surrendering your identity to it. There's an important difference between saying I am dangerous and saying I am experiencing a disturbing thought. The first statement turns a mental event into a personal verdict. The second statement tells the truth about what is happening without making a conclusion that has not been established. In other words, describe the event, do not become the event. Now notice what is happening in the body as well. Is your breathing becoming quick and shallow? Are your shoulders tightening? Do you feel restless, tired, warm, cold, or agitated? Are you aware of the room around you, or has all your attention narrowed on to the thought? Observe those sensations, but do not use them as evidence that the thought is true. A tense body tells you that you are experiencing tension. A racing heart tells you that you are alarmed. Those sensations may call for patience and care, but they do not confirm a prophecy, establish an identity, or render a moral verdict. Here's a simple way to steady yourself. First, slow the pace. You do not have to decide the meaning of the thought in the first moment of alarm. Second, feel the physical contact beneath you, the chair supporting you, or your feet resting on the floor. Third, identify your present setting. I am in this room at this time doing this task. Then allow the first surge of fear to settle before you make any judgment. Someone may say, but I tried that and I did not feel completely peaceful. Feeling perfect is not the goal of this first step. The goal is to keep panic from becoming agreement. You may still feel unsettled while responding wisely. Calm action does not require flawless emotion. Another person may object, if I observe the thought calmly, am I not accepting it? No. Composure is not consent. If anything, composure gives you room to answer truthfully. Panic rushes you toward a conclusion. Calm observation keeps the conclusion open until the claim has been tested. Suppose you are washing dishes, answering an email, or preparing to leave home, and a sudden fear says, something terrible is about to happen. Instead of dropping everything and beginning an emergency investigation, pause and say, a frightening prediction is present. My body is alarmed, but I have not established that this thought is true. Feel your feet on the floor. Notice the room. Then remain with the ordinary task long enough to respond deliberately. Do not turn noticing into endless self-monitoring. Some call it vigilance. But if you spend the next hour searching the mind for another appearance of the thought, you have moved from noticing into preoccupation. Noticing should be brief and useful. It creates distance. It does not create another ritual. So practice this the next time an unwanted thought appears. Speak or write one neutral sentence describing what happened. Do not use the language of identity, destiny, or condemnation. Say, I noticed a disturbing image, or my mind presented a fearful possibility. That is enough for the first step. Now you have created a little distance between yourself and the initial alarm. You are no longer responding automatically. And once the thought has been noticed without panic, you are ready for the second step. Examine what it is actually claiming and decide whether that claim deserves belief. Once you have noticed the thought without panic, do not assume that it arrived already proven. Thoughts are candidates for examination. They are not commands merely because they are urgent, and they are not facts merely because they are repeated. Now take the vague dread and put its claim into a clear sentence. Fear prefers a cloud. Something is wrong. Something bad is coming. I cannot trust myself. But you cannot examine a cloud very well. Ask, what exactly is this thought claiming? Perhaps the claim is, because I feel uneasy, danger must be near. Or because I made one mistake, I am entirely corrupt. Once the claim is plain, it can be tested. Ask 4 questions. First, what is this thought claiming? Second, what evidence am I assuming rather than actually knowing? Third, is this thought confusing possibility with certainty? Fourth, is it producing a wise responsibility, or is it demanding fearful control over something I cannot control? Then test the claim against what you know of God's character and the identity you have received in Him. But be balanced here. Not every difficult thought is false simply because it makes you uncomfortable. Sometimes truth corrects us. Sometimes wisdom warns us to slow down, apologize, obtain help, or avoid a genuine danger. The test is not, do I like this thought? The test is its claim truthful, proportionate, and directed toward responsible action? This helps us distinguish conviction from condemnation. Conviction identifies something specific and points toward a faithful next step. Admit the wrong, make amends, change the behavior, receive mercy, and continue forward. Condemnation attacks the whole person. It says you are hopeless. You can never be restored. You must keep punishing yourself. Conviction permits movement after responsibility is taken. Condemnation keeps the prisoner in the courtroom after the matter has been addressed. There is also a difference between prudent concern and intrusive fear. Prudent concern says, you have a symptom. Arrange an appropriate evaluation. Intrusive fear says, search without stopping until you possess absolute certainty that nothing could ever be wrong. Prudent concern says that relationship has been strained. Have an honest conversation. Fear says review every word until you can guarantee what the other person thinks. A responsible moral concern may say that action was wrong, acknowledge it and correct it. Condemnation says because you failed in one action, your entire identity is fraudulent. A reasonable safety concern may say, check the lock once and leave. Fear says, check again and again, because certainty must be perfect before you are allowed to rest. Someone will ask, but what if the thought is true? Then take whatever clear and proportionate responsibility is available now. If an apology is needed, apologize. If information is needed, obtain it from a fitting source. If there is a practical safety step, take it. If professional evaluation is appropriate, arrange it. But after the responsible step has been identified, refuse fear's demand that you solve every possible future before returning to life. Testing a thought does not mean arguing with it for half an hour. Once you recognize its category, repeated debate only gives it more attention. Examination should lead to a verdict, and the verdict should lead to action or release. You may say this thought is treating a possibility as certainty, attacking my identity, and demanding control I do not possess. I will not agree with that claim. Or when responsibility is present, say there is one wise step available to me. I will take that step, and I will not add fearful speculation to it. Remember the governing principle. Truth determines agreement, intensity does not, repetition does not, urgency does not. You now have criteria for separating responsible guidance from fear's exaggerated and condemning demands. But testing the claim raises a deeper question. If a thought is present but false, condemning, or unwanted, whose voice defines the person, we must now separate the thought from identity, because a sentence spoken within the mind is not automatically the name written over your life. The mind can report something that the heart does not endorse and the will does not choose. That is the identity correction we must hold firmly. What appears in awareness may be real as an experience, but it is not therefore true as a definition of you. Sometimes the thought even speaks in the first person. It says, I want this, I believe this, or I am this kind of person. And because the sentence uses the word I, fear says, there, you have confessed who you really are. But first-person wording does not place a thought beyond examination. A mental sentence beginning with I is still a mental event. It must be tested like any other claim. Identity is not established by the loudest moment in your awareness. It is formed around the truth you receive, the loyalties you choose, the character you practice, and the direction in which you walk. An intrusion announces itself without permission. Identity is expressed through continued allegiance and chosen action. Do not confuse an interruption with a direction. This is especially important when the thought is morally or religiously disturbing. A person may experience a shocking image, a blasphemous phrase, or an impulse that contradicts everything they value, and then become ashamed because it appeared. But being grieved by an unwanted thought is not the same as cherishing it. Being startled is not pursuing it. Resisting it is not embracing it. Then fear may demand repeated proof of innocence. The person confesses the same unwanted thought again and again, asks others for reassurance, checks the heart for the right feeling, and tries to establish a perfect certainty that never lasts. Relief comes for a moment, but when the thought returns, the identity trial begins all over again. You do not need a new trial every time the same accusation returns. Imagine an accuser entering a courtroom with the same unproven charge, only spoken more loudly than before. Has the volume created new evidence? Has repetition changed the facts? No. If no new evidence has appeared, the recurring accusation does not require a new verdict. Now we must remain balanced. Separating a thought from identity is not an excuse for chosen harmful conduct. If a person welcomes what is wrong, deliberately nurtures it, or acts upon it, responsibility must be faced honestly. Grace does not require us to pretend that chosen actions were involuntary. But the opposite error is equally serious. We must not assign voluntary guilt where there was no consent. An unwanted mental event should not be treated as though it were a chosen deed. Responsibility belongs where choice belongs. That preserves both moral seriousness and mercy. So speak from settled identity rather than frantic self-defense. Say, I am not required to obey fear. Say, I can choose what I welcome and practice. Say, my direction is not determined by this mental interruption. These are not excuses. They are statements of responsibility. They place the emphasis where it belongs upon truth, allegiance, and chosen action. When this distinction becomes clear, behavior changes. You no longer have to hide because a thought embarrassed you. You can resume ordinary duties without first achieving perfect internal certainty. You can pray honestly without turning prayer into punishment. You can seek pastoral, medical, or mental health support without treating the need for help as an admission that the thought defines you. Let us practice it briefly. Name the thought as separate. An unwanted fear is present. Name the truth you are choosing. This thought does not define my identity or command my future. Then name one faithful next action. I will finish this task. I will speak honestly with someone I trust. Or I will take the responsible step already available to me. Remember the chain. What appears is tested. What is tested is either accepted or refused. What is accepted is then expressed through chosen attention and action. The thought does not skip that process merely because it speaks loudly. When identity is settled, shame begins to lose its grip. You can resist firmly without defending yourself frantically. And now, with the thought separated from identity, we are ready for the fourth step. Answer its false claim with relevant truth briefly, clearly, and specifically. Answering a thought with truth does not mean pretending that distress is absent. You may still feel the pressure of fear. You may still notice tension in the body. But you are refusing to let that distress supply the final interpretation. The feeling may report, I am alarmed, but it does not have the authority to conclude, therefore the threat is certain. Now the answer must be relevant. A vague slogan may sound encouraging, but if it does not address the distortion, it will not help you respond clearly. First identify what fear is doing, then answer that particular claim. If fear demands absolute certainty about the future, answer with trust for the next step. I do not possess complete knowledge of tomorrow, but I can act wisely today. If fear attacks your identity, answer with chosen allegiance. This unwanted thought does not define what I welcome, believe, or practice. If fear predicts catastrophe, answer with present responsibility. I will attend to what is actually before me, not every disaster my imagination can produce. If condemnation declares you hopeless, answer with the truth that wrong can be acknowledged, correction can be made, mercy can be received, and life can move forward. Notice that none of those answers promises what you do not know. None denies reality. They are truthful, proportionate, and connected to responsible action. Then be brief. State the answer clearly and move on. Do not repeat it 20 times while waiting for anxiety to grant you permission to stop. If you turn a truthful statement into a ritual for obtaining perfect relief, fear has found another way to keep your attention. Here is the complete pattern. I notice the fear. Its claim is not established. It does not define me. Here is the truth I choose. Now I will return to the task before me. Spoken words have an important place because they help bring your attention and action into deliberate alignment with truth. But the words are not a magical formula. Their effectiveness is not measured by volume, emotion, or the number of repetitions. Speaking truth is an act of agreement and direction. It tells the mind where you are standing and tells your behavior where you are going. Someone may say, I answered the thought, but I still feel afraid. That does not make the answer false. Obedience and immediate sensation are not the same thing. You can act upon truth while emotion settles gradually. If you wait until every feeling agrees before you move, fear still controls the schedule. Prepare a few responses in advance for themes that return often. Keep them plain and balanced. Write one for uncertainty, one for condemnation, one for identity accusations, and one for catastrophic prediction. Connect each answer to an action. I cannot know everything, but I can take the next wise step. I can correct what is mine without condemning my whole person. This thought is unwanted. I will continue in the direction I have chosen. And remember, spiritual language must never be used to deny a genuine responsibility, symptom, conflict, or safety concern. Truth may lead you to apologize, obtain medical advice, set a boundary, leave danger, or ask for help. A truthful answer does not close the door to responsible care. It shows you which door to walk through. Suppose the thought says that physical sensation certainly means disaster. You notice the fear. You test the claim and recognize that it has turned uncertainty into certainty. You separate it from identity. This alarm does not define me. Then you answer, I will take any appropriate health step, but I will not treat a fearful prediction as a diagnosis. That is firm without being reckless and responsible without surrendering to panic. You now have language strong enough to resist fear and brief enough to prevent endless debate. But once truth has been spoken, do not remain standing before the thought as though another argument is required. The next act of authority is to withdraw unnecessary attention and redirect it toward the present assignment. Refusing a thought is incomplete if you remain seated beside it, checking every few moments to see whether it has truly gone. You may have rejected its claim with your words, but if you keep giving it your full attention, fear still occupies the center of the room. Redirection does not mean forcing the mind to become blank. The harder you command yourself not to think of something, the more you may find yourself checking whether you are still thinking about it. Redirection means choosing the next worthy object of attention. You decide where to place your mind and what to do with your body now. That may mean returning to your work, listening to the person speaking with you, taking needed rest, praying without frantic repetition, going for a walk, completing a household responsibility, making something useful, or serving another person. The next action need not be dramatic. It only needs to be concrete. Ask, what is the next faithful thing I can do for 5 minutes? Open the document. Wash the plate. Make the appropriate phone call. Sit down and rest. Step outside and notice your surroundings. You do not have to wait until every trace of anxiety has disappeared. Action can begin while some discomfort remains. Suppose a fear interrupts you while you are writing an email. You notice it. A fearful prediction is present. You test it. This is treating a possibility as certainty. You separate it from identity. This thought does not define or command me. You answer it. I will address what is actually known and leave speculation alone. Then you return to the next sentence of the email. A minute later, the thought returns. Does that mean the process failed? No. You do not need to reopen the entire argument. Answer no more fully than necessary. That claim has already been tested. Then return to the sentence again. Some will say, but I had to redirect myself 10 times. Then you practice chosen authority 10 times. Victory is not measured only by whether a thought returned. It may be measured by whether you return to truth, to responsibility, to prayer, to rest, and to the life before you. Perfect concentration is not required for faithful redirection. Use sensible supports as well. Reduce needless overstimulation. Establish simple routines. Pause unhelpful searching that feeds fear rather than wisdom. Arrange your environment so the next responsible action is easier to begin. These measures do not replace spiritual practice. They help you carry it into ordinary life. So remember the full movement. Notice the thought without panic. Test its claim. Separate it from identity. Answer with relevant truth. Then redirect your attention and act. The process moves from awareness to examination, from examination to agreement or refusal, and from refusal to conduct. For the next 24 hours, keep a brief record. Write only 3 things: the thought that appeared, the truth you chose, and the action you resume. 1 line for each is enough. Do not turn the exercise into pages of analysis. Its purpose is to train movement, not preoccupation. Now authority has become observable. You are no longer waiting for complete internal silence before living. You are resuming life under the direction of chosen truth. But we must broaden the picture. because bodily strain, personal history, and learned patterns can intensify distress. Those factors deserve wise attention, and attending to them does not mean abandoning faith. We must not create a false choice between spiritual response and practical care. Prayer has its place. Renewed thinking has its place. And rest, health evaluation, wise boundaries, honest relationships, and skilled support also have their place. Caring for the whole person does not divide faith. It puts wisdom into practice. Exhaustion may make distress harder to manage. Prolonged stress may keep the mind and body in a state of alarm. Painful experiences may leave patterns that are activated by present situations. Physical illness, medication concerns, or habits strengthened by repetition may also affect how intrusive fear is experienced. We do not need to turn any of these factors into a final explanation before we acknowledge that they may deserve attention. And remember, a contributing condition is not an identity. Fatigue may influence your present experience, but it does not name your destiny. A history of trauma may help explain why certain alarms are easily activated, but it does not reduce you to what happened. A learned pattern may be strong, but what was learned can be addressed with patience, truth, practice, and appropriate help. If a person strains a muscle, we do not usually accuse them of moral failure for needing rest, evaluation, or rehabilitation. We recognize that something has been overburdened and requires care. Apply that same patience when the mind has been carrying too much for too long. Compassion does not remove responsibility. It makes responsible care possible without condemnation. Take an honest inventory. How have you been sleeping? Are you eating regularly and caring for basic physical needs? Has your workload become unreasonable? Have you been isolated from trustworthy people? Are unresolved painful experiences being repeatedly stirred? Are there physical symptoms that should be discussed with a clinician? Have you formed habits of constant reassurance, checking, searching, or avoidance that keep fear at the center of your attention? These questions are not accusations. They help you identify where wise adjustment may be needed. Acknowledging a condition that intensifies distress is not surrendering authority. It is refusing to ignore relevant truth. We must also be careful how we speak to distressed people. Telling someone that stronger faith should instantly remove every symptom may add shame to suffering and discourage them from receiving appropriate care. Faith should not become a weapon used against the weary, but there is another extreme. A person must not be reduced to a diagnosis, a bodily mechanism, or a collection of symptoms. Practical care should honor dignity, faith, relationships, responsibility, and meaningful action. A diagnosis may describe part of an experience. It does not contain the whole person. So identify one area of care you may have neglected. Perhaps it is sleep, workload, physical evaluation, connection with others, or attention to an old wound. Then identify one trustworthy person with whom you can discuss it. Bring what has been hidden into wise and compassionate conversation. None of these influences automatically defines you, just as an intrusive thought does not define you, but ignoring them can make a wise response more difficult. You have permission to pursue integrated care without calling ordinary human need a spiritual defeat. Now we must complete the teaching by becoming more specific about support. When should personal practice be joined by pastoral care, medical evaluation, mental health support, or urgent help to remain safe? That is not a minor question. It is the final step in responding responsibly to intrusive fear. Seeking support is not a confession that fear has won. It is an expression of wisdom and responsibility. If distress continues, grows stronger, or begins to govern daily life, you do not prove your faith by facing it alone. Additional help may be appropriate when sleep is seriously disrupted, Ordinary worker relationships become difficult to maintain, avoidance keeps spreading, or repeated checking and reassurance consume much of the day. It may also be needed when reactions connected to painful experiences remain overwhelming, or when you cannot apply the practices we have discussed safely and steadily by yourself. Different helpers have different roles, and those roles do not need to compete. A trusted pastor can offer prayer, spiritual guidance, and the strength of community. A medical professional can evaluate physical symptoms, health conditions, or medication concerns that may be contributing to distress. A qualified mental health professional can help address intrusive patterns, trauma avoidance, and practical ways of responding. Look for people who respect your faith and also take the seriousness of your distress seriously. Now hear this clearly. If thoughts involve an immediate risk of harming yourself, harming another person, or an inability to remain safe, contact local emergency or crisis support immediately and involve a trusted person who can stay with you. Do not face an urgent safety situation alone. An unwanted harmful thought is not automatically the same as a desire or intention to act. We have established that distinction throughout this message. But if you are uncertain about your immediate safety or someone else's safety, do not try to settle that uncertainty through private debate. Seek direct, prompt help. Let us gather the whole practice into 6 simple steps. First, notice without panic. A thought is present, but I have not agreed with it. Second, test the claim. What is this thought asserting, and is it truthful, proportionate, and responsible? Third, separate it from identity. This mental interruption does not define what I welcome or choose. Fourth, answer with relevant truth. Say what directly corrects the distortion. Fifth, redirect attention into action. Return to the next faithful responsibility without waiting for perfect feelings. Sixth, seek fitting support when distress persists, functioning is disrupted, or safety is uncertain. Suppose an intrusive thought appears during an ordinary morning and says, "You are going to lose control." You notice it without panic. You test it and recognize that fear has presented a possibility as certainty. You separate it from identity. This thought does not declare who I am or what I intend. You answer, "I can choose my next responsible action, and I will seek help if safety becomes uncertain." Then you return to preparing breakfast or getting ready for work. If this fear keeps returning and disrupting your life, you arrange a conversation with an appropriate helper. The process is calm, direct, and repeatable. Now make it practical. Write down one recurring claim that fear makes. Beside it, write one truthful answer. Then write one action to which you will redirect your attention. Finally, write the name of one person you can contact if you need support. Do not leave that last space blank merely because you hope never to use it. Wisdom prepares before pressure rises. We began with the image of a signature. Your mind may place many statements on the desk. Some may be vivid, frightening, condemning, or persistent. But you retain responsibility for what you believe, what you practice, and what you obey. You do not have to sign every statement placed before you. Progress may not mean that an unwanted thought never appears again. It may mean that you recognize it sooner, answer it more calmly, return to life more quickly, and ask for help more freely. That is real movement. Fear no longer determines your identity or direction. So say this with settled purpose. I will notice without panic. I will test what I hear. I will not confuse intrusion with identity. I will agree with truth, take the next wise action, and receive appropriate help when I need it. When the next thought comes, put the framework into practice. Continue in ordinary faithful action, and whenever distress persists or safety is in question, involve the right support without shame or delay.